want to talk a little bit about solar panels. I worked in the solar industry as a field technician, an installer. Um, this would have been a few years ago now, but I've been very interested in the solar panel technology and the industry as a whole, following some of the trends and technology breakthroughs, material upgrades, new panel technology, bifacial panels, lots of cool developments. But I noticed something, my time in the field, actually handling the panels, walking on them, watching them get hot in the sun, seeing ones that were dirty and covered in dust and sometimes snow, tree sap, pollen from fields and wind, hard water deposits after rain, even lots and lots of bird droppings in certain agricultural setups, things I hadn't never thought before actually working around solar in a more commercial environment. I noticed a lot of things about the panels, from how heavy some of the older ones are to how light some of the new bifacial panel ones are. One thing I noticed about the panels fairly quickly, as a new installer, after getting over, your fear of heights and some of those very basic things, was how to walk around the panels, where to step, where you can and can't step depending on how flat the arrays are and what the mounting structures are. And one thing you notice with that right away is how hot they are, and how hot they can get, apparently up to like 40 degrees different from the surrounding atmosphere. I'm going to try to pick up the pace of this a little bit, because I don't want this to drag on too long. I want to get some key concepts shared in a short amount of time. So we're going to put on a little slideshow and demonstrate some different images here. These are all just images collected from Google, with a few images being created, also Google, Gemini, and so forth. I want to talk about some of the other inherent problems with solar, just as the way they're currently manufactured and implemented. And that's, of course, the fragile nature of the panels. They are subject to hail, just like car windows and things like that. Although they are, the material science moves fast, so they are incredibly strong for what they are. But of course, if you have a great big large arrays of glass panels like that, of course, in super severe weather, they can take quite a beating. So to some extent, they are fragile, and they also house delicate electrical components and so forth. So they have to be protected, the way they're manufactured, the way the photovoltaic cells are stuck together in these sheets. It makes sense to protect them with sheets of glass, frames of metal and aluminum, and sandwich all your different components into the different layers, making them easy to produce, stackable, shippable, easy to calculate for space, easy to manufacture racking systems and things that will allow appropriate tilt angles, robust materials like aluminums and metals, of course, like I said, impact-resistant polycarbonates and glasses, and then, of course, all kinds of rubbers and plastics for sheathing the electrical components. All these materials get very hot in the sun and undergo what's known as kind of black body radiation, in that because of all of these materials and because of the dark nature of the photovoltaic cells, they heat up more than the surrounding atmosphere. And that's going to be very important to what I'm going to talk about here in a second. I noticed working with the panels fairly quickly that the mirage effect is very prominent in the panels, and that's if you look across an array when they're hot, the wavy effect is just like that on a desert highway, right? The that layer of hot air just above that large plane or that surface, whether it's the tarmac or a vast array of solar panels, it heats up and it creates an atmospheric refraction effect, which we call a mirage. And when that happens, it's actually bending the visible light spectrum as much as 180 degrees, which is why it can look like water on the road's surface, but it's actually almost a mirror. You're actually seeing a reflection of the light above that. So what looks like water is actually the sky, of course. This is relevant because it doesn't just bend the visible light spectrum, it also bends the other spectrums and other energy fields. Primarily, I'm referring to the infrared spectrum, which is kind of the juiciest production zone or wavelengths of light that really make the freeing of the electrons in the photovoltaic cells happen. But it's also where we gain the most amount of heat. So we've got kind of a double-edged sword here. We want to point our solar receptacle energy devices at the sun, but in doing so, we're literally creating this somewhat invisible force field that is bending the visible light and the more invisible light directly away from our photovoltaic surface. Using FLIR cameras and technology, you can get a much more clear image of how hot these get and the differential between the surface temperature and the surrounding area. An interesting thing of note on this mirage effect in solar panels, as an installer I noticed that this effect could take place even in a fairly cold environment, to my surprise. Cold enough to see my breath even, cold enough for there to be frost on things, but as soon as the sun would start to warm the surface of the panels, even with the chill in the air, you could still get this mirage effect, and it started to dawn on me that pretty much no matter what, because of the very shape of a solar panel, with all of the photovoltaic cells pushed together, flat and rectangular, and then with a smooth surface, no matter how you point that at the sun, you've created an exact perfect environment for that heated thermal refraction phenomenon to take place, which is essentially bending a lot of your usable light away from your surface. The efficiency of some of the more modern panels, being the bifacials, are experiencing greater efficiency because they're utilizing a lot of the reflecting visual light and infrared light off of the return surface, whether it's the ground or the roof that they're mounted on, and those underside photovoltaic cells, right? They're bifacial because they have them on the top and the bottom, or the front and the back, depending on how you want to look at it. And the underside cells or the backside cells are not subject to the direct light heating their receptive surface. So they don't form that thermal film where the atmospheric refraction is taking place. They're, of course, getting a reflected, filtered light almost, so that surface is not getting hot. On top of that, they're on the underside of the array, and the heat, as it rises, of course, is rising against the incoming light lines on the top of the array and causing that effect. And on the underside, they're cooler, and they are not undergoing that phenomenon nearly to the extent as the top side, or the more heated side, where that thermal differential is much greater, and there's a much more defined film or mirage effect going on the surface. on top of this phenomenon, there's not a whole lot you can do to defeat some of these inherent issues with solar, from the maintenance and cleaning to the fragile nature to their primary enemy, which is heat. One angle that I see people exploring and engineering and building towards are bifacial, vertically hung panels. This shows great direction in eliminating that primary enemy in efficiency in solar energy capture, which is heat. I want to address a few things that are going right and a few things that still need to shift. The vertical hung panel, bifacial and more translucent, sheds heat, obviously, way quicker. That vertical plane, there's very little for heat, which is rising away from its heated surface very quickly, and with nowhere to pool or gather, it slips away and keeps that mirage effect, that thin film of heated air, to a minimum, if there very much at all. However, the panels that are being hung vertically are still a plane, a flat surface plane, to absorb heat and create that effect, even if it's being minimized. It's kind of like the idea of solar panels on a cloudy day, or the backside of the panels on the ground array. These are sweet spots, but we haven't completely engineered our way away from these extremely thermally conductive materials, being the metal framing holding all of the vertical arrays, or even the arrays themselves still holding that large flat plane. Imagine that hot highway creating that mirage effect. Now somehow in the future we take that highway and we flip it up on its side. The mirage effect, for the most part, is going to slip off of the highway, but it's still going to be there to some extent. It's still going to be running along the surface of the highway. It's just going to be much thinner as that heat is slipping up and away. That's a ridiculous example because we don't need to make our highways sideways, but the same is true with the solar panel. The flat plane is still holding that phenomenon to some extent and holding back our productivity. My proposed solution to almost all of these problems, to a certain degree, with the thermal being the greatest focus, is to implement a new solar panel design, not by furthering the science and advancing the materials, but by simply stopping and deconstructing our existing panels as they are. Remove the thick sheets of protective impact-resistant glass, do away with the metal frames altogether, and reconfigure as follows. Imagine all of the specific individual photovoltaic cells that make up your panel separate. Imagine each one of them on the end of a rubberized tree branch, like a flat pack Christmas tree. Each individual cell free from that flat plane, free from its brothers and sisters that it used to be packed and sandwiched next to. Like the individual nodes on a tree branch, the leaves or the pine needles, these individual cells will allow air to flow freely around them and thus prevent this atmospheric refraction phenomenon from having anywhere to take hold. As you spiral these recycled and repurposed plastics and rubber branches and construct these conifer-shaped solar engagement arrays, these organic biomimicry tree structures where the individual solar cells are separate and allowed to breathe, still utilizing the bifacial, the translucent materials, and perhaps encasing each individual finger or photovoltaic cell, or leaf, perhaps, as they'll be known eventually, in its own sandwich of polycarbonate or impact-resistant glass, still protecting each individual cell, but now freeing them with air and atmosphere all around them, with the conductors contained within the rubberized branches, allowing movement, utilizing high-strand, high-movement designed copper conductors, probably something for like automotive, 12-volt industry, with lots of, again, high-strand fiber for movement and resilience in the vibratory and conductive nature. Wired in series at the branch level and then into parallel for performance, for voltage, configured this way for redundancy, of course, as individual cells could withstand great amounts of impact, of course, with the give and the flex of the branch and the rubberized design and the embedded conductors for protected redundancy. But still, if one was damaged, of course, it would not impede the energy flow of the other solar panel components. I see this biomimicry, shedding snow, pollen, dust, being perfectly suitable for birds and small mammals, insects to inhabit, requiring much, much less cleaning and care, as the wind and the rain will clean these surfaces and prevent snow and dust and dirt buildup much, much more like natural trees, as opposed to large flat surfaces which are prone to electrostatic cling with their high voltage and their perpetual heat production. They will solve a lot of the problems in solar, and they will absolutely do away with solar's main invisible competitor, which is atmospheric refraction, the invisible mirage effect, reflecting away all of that precious infrared light and creating all of this ridiculous heat. And if you're an installer or a solar engineer, you know what I'm talking about. Boy, oh boy, do they get hot. Thanks for listening.